Men did not make the earth. It is the value of the improvements only, and not the earth itself that is individual property. Every proprietor owes to the community a ground rent for the land which he holds. Thomas Paine. The earth and all its valuable resources didn't cost any money to create. This is an undeniable fact. Land, water, gold, oil, food, and other valuable resources existed for billions of years before humans walked the earth and ideas of money, economies, or capitalism were even conceptualized. So why are we forced to spend our whole lives working miserable jobs we hate for 10 hours a day, 50 weeks out the year, just to acquire resources that didn't cost any money to create in the first place? This is quite literally the biggest scam ever that the entirety of modern society was built upon. We've been brainwashed to believe this lie by centuries of propaganda, but today it's time we push back and expose this scam that has robbed us of all our time and happiness in our only time on this earth. We are born worthy and valuable. Humans don't need to earn a living. We deserve a living, and a select group of narcissistic people have taken over the world and made everyone believe the opposite. This is why slavery isn't stopping anytime soon. Too many people are indoctrinated. So, it is no secret that Gen Z doesn't want to work. To be honest, no one ever wanted to work, but Gen Z is the only generation to have the balls to publicly and vocally declare it out loud. And as such, they're being relentlessly criticized by delusional boomers and corporate chills, who, unsurprisingly, are desperately trying to defend the broken system they rely on to exploit others for their own profits. Now, as the millennial defense lawyer for Gen Z, I've seen how this argument plays out countless times on my channel and in real life. A young giga-based Gen Z Chad recently blew up on TikTok for this video in which he made a fantastic point that pretty much sums it all up.
A lot of the things we take as normal are actually fucking insane, okay? The phrase to earn a living is batshit crazy. Do you understand how crazy that is? To earn a living implies that if you don't earn, you fucking die? You have to earn the right to live? Is that not a God-given right?
This video went absolutely viral, and for good reason. Have you ever thought about how insane it is that the phrase earn a living even exists? As if our lives are inherently worthless if we don't work. We've been conditioned and brainwashed by society for far too long that we just sort of mindlessly accept it. But wait, I know exactly what you're thinking. Yes, you should have to earn a living because otherwise others have to work to support you, which makes you a leech and a social parasite, right? That's what all the delusional boomers and corporate shills say in response, which is always the next step in how this argument plays out. And I'll give credit where credit is due. Although this argument is false, as you will soon see, it is at least clever, and on the surface level, it's hard to rebuke. It is the textbook definition of sophistry, which is the art of making false but clever arguments that sound good and thus make for a challenging debate. Now, the only way to handle a sophist is to take the challenge head on and bring the fight directly to them. So, are you ready? Let's get this started. Let's break down and really analyze this issue of quote-unquote free stuff. Why should you just get free stuff? Why should others work so that you can get free stuff? And the simple answer is because the earth itself was free to create, and others didn't have to work for that in the first place. All the valuable resources you see around you every day, such as land, water, food, gold, oil, etc., were free to create and existed for billions of years before the concept of money even existed. No one had to pay for them in the first place, so why should you? Now, as Thomas Paine said, humans have made improvements to existing resources from the earth, building a refinery on top of an oil reserve, building a house upon the land, building a farm to grow the food that feeds us all. So, of course, people who do work should be compensated extra for that. In fact, they would actually make a lot more if the rest of us got free stuff. But we'll get into that a bit more later. But due to centuries of consumerist brainwashing, we've totally lost sight of the fact that the base layer of resources, even without human improvements, have inherent value. If you don't believe me, try to build an oil refinery on a random plot of land with no oil and see how far you get. Try to build a house on just complete random thin air. It's physically impossible. Even the components required for the improvements are made from base layer resources that were free to create in the first place. Humans are not gods. We do not have the technology or ability to conjure stuff out of thin air. We've only gotten good at building improvements upon existing resources that were free to create in the first place. So, now that we've clearly established that the base layer of resources were free to create and have inherent value, the only question that remains is this: who is entitled to them? Part 2, Geo-libertarianism. Hey guys, real quick, you may have noticed we're getting very close to 10,000 subscribers now. So if you're new here and enjoying this content, definitely consider subscribing and helping us get closer to this magic number. Would really appreciate it. Thanks a bunch. You guys are awesome. The fundamental philosophy that base resources were free to create and therefore belong to all of us is based on a lost political movement known as Geo-libertarianism. Whenever people ask me the question, but why should you just get stuff for free? I always ask, why do you think the government should just get stuff for free? Let's say a multi-billion-dollar oil company wants to move in and build a refinery upon an existing oil reserve. They have to pay a huge sum of money to the government for the rights to that land. But wait a second, who did the government have to pay for the rights to that land? That's right, nobody. They just took it for themselves for free and sold it off for billions. The people who are of the mindset that no one should be entitled to free stuff typically are also really anti-government, which is where it gets very ironic. These people don't think everyday people like you and me are entitled to even bare minimum living expenses like food and shelter. But they either think or just quietly accept that the government and their corporate buddies are just randomly entitled to trillions of dollars worth of earthly resources that they neither had to work for nor pay for. Now, the main rebuttal I've seen to this argument is, well, they're entitled to these resources because they got there and defended it first. I'm not gonna lie, this is where they even lose their sophistry, because not only is this argument false, it's downright stupid. The distribution and ownership of who owns the resource today was determined by bloodshed, wars, genocide, and literal mass murder. If you're arguing that whoever got there first should have the rights to the resources, well, then no one should have anything unless you're Native American. Now, I get that America isn't the world, thank God, but the same principle still applies. Outside of maybe a few small, isolated, uncontacted tribes in the Amazon or these really exotic places, no one who owns and controls the resources today were the ones who got there first. If you trace back the history, you'll almost always find that there was some war or massive genocide that forced the original native population off the land and resources through the means of force. So, by this logic, only genocidal psychopathic warlords who killed millions of people should be entitled to trillions of dollars of free stuff, while the rest of us normal people who don't go around senselessly killing millions are entitled to nothing and should be forced to work for everything. When I point out this fact, the next step in progression of this argument is that these corporate shills just start calling me a woke moralist. Like, wow, God forbid pointing out that genocide is morally wrong, right? I mean, yeah, that's such a controversial opinion, right? But I know these corporate shills don't have morals, so we can pick apart their argument using their own logic too. If they want to argue that it's okay to seize these free resources via war, coercion, and genocide, in other words, through force, then by their own logic, using force to obtain free resources is fair game. So by that logic, then it would be perfectly fair for us to vote in an extremely socialist government that taxes them at 100% and redistributes the profits to the rest of us via force. Now, of course, if you propose that, suddenly they'll start caring about morals for the first time in their lives. They'll start complaining and crying that you're stealing resources from them via force, and the grand irony with all this is that they either don't realize or are trying to intentionally distract you from the fact that they obtained the rights to all these free resources in the first place via force themselves. So, as you can see, this is the moral reason that we are all entitled to free stuff. The issue isn't so much why should you just get stuff for free. The issue is more that stuff was free to create in the first place. The earth was free to create in the first place. Therefore, the only question is who should be entitled to it? Should it only be genocidal warlords, corrupt governments, and greedy corporations? Or should everyone receive a fair share? Call me crazy, but I think it's the latter. This does, however, lead to an even more interesting question. You might be thinking, well, this all sounds good in theory, but how do we actually implement it in practice? I'm glad you asked. Part 3, Georgism. Our tax system is a mess. Everybody agrees on that. But once again, what would be the solution? When I went down the rabbit hole of geoliberalism, it led me to another very interesting lost economic philosophy known as Georgism, named after its founder, Henry George. The proposed tax system under Georgism probably is the most fair and logical one I've ever seen. Under Georgism, you would implement a land value tax to the base inherent value of the land, but not the man-made improvements built on top of it. This just makes so much sense because, once again, the inherent land value was free to create, and therefore, if somebody wants to lay claim to it, they should pay taxes on the base inherent value of the land. But since they built their own improvements on top of it, they get to keep all the money they actually did work for with no taxes. Although you could theoretically argue that all property is theft, I am someone who believes that people need to have their own private property for society to function. So rather than implement communist-style communal ownership of all land, a land value tax under Georgism just makes way more sense. This land value tax should then be redirected towards all of us in the form of universal basic income. This is why we are all morally entitled to free stuff. It is simply because the earth was free to create in the first place. And if you go down the historical line of ownership, you'll always see that someone at some point got something for free. So the only question that remains is, should only genocidal, psychopathic warlords and corrupt governments be entitled to free stuff while the rest of us work for peanuts? Or should we all deserve a fair share of the earth that was free to create? Hopefully, after watching this video, you can see that morally, logically, and rationally speaking, it's the latter. There is one last issue I want to address because this gets repeatedly brought up in the comments anytime I bring up universal basic income. Wouldn't everyone stop working? I just don't buy this argument because it's dependent on the assumption that people only want basic living necessities like food and shelter. It's called universal basic income, keyword basic, for a reason. It is just complete nonsense that people only want to eat and sleep. They don't want cars, computers, vacations, big screen TVs, better clothes and shoes, etc., etc. In fact, if anything, it would actually incentivize work because once your basic living expenses are covered, you have way more bargaining power to negotiate for fair wages when you no longer have the threat of homelessness and starvation over your head. So people who don't want to work get to live a basic level of existence, and the people who do want to work actually get paid well enough to afford more than the bare minimum. It's way more fair than this modern system where just about everyone is working for the bare minimum. We are all entitled to a fair share of the land that was free to create. But if you build improvements on it, you keep everything you personally built. This is why Gen Z is right, and we are, in fact, entitled to free stuff. This is why it's ludicrous to suggest that we have to earn the right to live. We are all children of the earth that was created for free, and thus we all deserve our fair share of it.